Hello and welcome to Property Matters, a weekly look at all matters property designed to be of interest to anyone who has an interest in property. Property Matters is supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. Now, each week we focus on those big property stories that are making the news, and we'd love you to get involved, so put your comments in the comments section below wherever you're watching us today. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you get notifications of when we're live. And of course, you can email us if you wish, propertymatterstv@gmail.com. Getting straight into it this morning, and welcome to Joe Joshi. Good morning.
Good morning, Paul. Good morning, everybody. Happy Sunday morning. And I know you're probably looking at me and thinking, where's he going on a Sunday morning? But Sunday morning best, I thought, just to get you all guessing as to what's going on in the Joe Joshi world. Keeps the what do they say? Change is as good as the rest. So trying to get back into what I think should be business attire for business world, but having had all this pandemic time off and getting too relaxed.
I just assumed you were off to the temple, Joe.
That'll be a different attire, Paul. I'll try that one on the next time for you.
Okay, then let's move into our first story, and of course it's the end of a month again, so that means we have the Zoopla House Price Index report for December. So house prices for the year of 2021, Joe, now confirmed at 7.4% the growth. Demand for homes up 49% in the 4 weeks to the 16th of January versus the same period of 2018 to 2021. And still got that negative supply of properties at the moment, as you well know. We just haven't had the flow of new property into the market, although the suggestion is that in January things are starting to ease up a little bit, which is good. So basically your property went up by an average of 17,000 in 2021. The average house price now 242,000. Wales considered to be the fastest growing part of the country, 11.3% growth there. Lots of people realising the house prices were really cheap, it was quite peaceful, and they could relocate there. Whereas the other end of the scale, London, just 2.6% growth. But we've got this new demand in January. Apparently, levels of interest at the estate agent offices up 50% on the usual January, so that's quite interesting. And level of buyer demand has reached new highs for family houses and also flats. People are getting interested in them because there presumably are a few bargains around now. So an interesting year, but obviously to prove your point, Joe, it's always good to put your money in bricks and mortar.
Yeah, well, 7%, 7.4% return on an investment is actually particularly good, isn't it, when you think about it, and when the banks have been actually offering out, and that's been always one of the things that I've sort of tried to get across to our viewers, our listeners, and my clients, is that basically your money in bricks and mortar is in the best place. It's the old adage of touching, feeling, and seeing, and that's what people want to see. They want to be able to, even if it's lying empty. So look at it this way: if you bought a buy-to-let property and it didn't actually make any money on the rental side, you would have actually had an increase in its capital growth of 7.4%. So you get a double whammy if you've got it rented out and its capital growth is happening, because you don't know what the return that each buyer or each landlord is getting. Let's assume that their mortgage is half of what it is, and they're probably getting another £300 or £400 a month gain on that. Obviously, take away the tax liabilities. There's still way ahead that you're going to get, and that comfort and the assurance and the surety of a property that you've got in bricks and mortar. And rightly so. I mean, when you think about what has happened over the pandemic, but forget about just that for a minute. Just generally, where do people feel the happiest, the most comfortable in their investment? And it's clear, isn't it, here, Paul, that that it is always going to be property, because there isn't. And if anything, the government really should be doing, this government or any government that comes in should be really thinking about is how other secure investment opportunities can they present for people to get comfortable with. And otherwise, it's always going to be based on property, and that the results are right in front of you.
Yeah, you can see that the here's the rate of growth over the last 2 or 3 years. So on the left, you've got January 2017. So growth in the year that at that point was 5%. Then it's come down as low as sort of 1.5% in about September 2019. Then it's rocketed, of course, this last year, and now you can just see that curve at the very end there on the far right hand side. That's just starting to wane as the price starts to ease out now. So you can see what a dramatic effect the government's policies on stamp duty and obviously the low interest rates as well, which were caused by the pandemic, the opposite effect all that's had in terms of stirring up the market. It's been quite a steep curve there, as you can see on the right hand side, compared to the more gentle from 2017 through to 2018. I think that really does sum it up really, really well, doesn't it, Joe?
Absolutely, and again, I just would say that you have to remember the policy that the government took on board here is to build their way out. So people felt comfortable, confident in the housing market. The pandemic made them think about their lives. Some people moved out, some people cashed in, and subsequently, it was the housing market that actually, in all honesty, became the backbone of the success of the government during the difficult times. So, on one hand, they're spending out lots of money, providing furlough and coverage and so forth. On the other hand, they made sure that people were investing in what they loved the most, and that's property. And then the property businesses that are related equally did well. I mean, the developers and the builders and the extension work and the B&Qs of this world and the Wicks and so forth are just snowed under with the DIY on from there to the furniture, the carpets, all of that has been doing extremely well in the marketplace thanks to the housing market fundamentally, and long may it continue. But of course, there will be, and we always said there will be a bit of a let up because you've got to take the foot off the accelerator a little bit, have a breather, let people and things catch up, and it will have another thing. But if you look back in history, over the 40 odd years, you will see pretty much on the average anything between 8 and 10 years, there has been this sort of surge and blip that goes on, and then it sort of calms down for a bit. But it's mainly because there isn't really an alternative, and people have to save, and the structures change, the mortgages change, and mortgages become a little bit easier, and they're allowing different multiples in different areas because they know that those are all going to make the differences in when people try to buy their first home, and putting their step on the first run of the ladder is almost one of the most important things in the system, because that's how the system works. And unless we have the first time buyers having the opportunities to start on the housing market, the snowball, it doesn't take a momentum. Unless, of course, you're a multimillionaire and you decided to just drop out of the sky and buy something in London for £40 million because you've got the money elsewhere. But in the UK, that system is based on the system that exists.
It's interesting to see that there's been a focus, I would imagine, on sort of landlords and so on flats again. And if you think about it, there's a logic to this, because if the average price has been going up by 7.4%, it's even higher in the cities. And obviously people are thinking about the fact that people are going to start going back to work again. Now, most flats in London have barely changed in value across 2 years, whereas across the UK, they've only been rising by about 2%. So compared to 7.4%, or if you look at cities like Liverpool, it's in double digits. There's some smart money going back into flats again, because actually they now represent really good value because the prices remain pretty static for 2 years. Everything else has been going up by up to 10%. So it actually makes a good deal of sense to look at flats again, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the flat market, as we said, I think it was probably last week or the week before when we discussed the flat market. I mean, the flat market situation is very clear. During the last couple of years, the focus became on the family home and that structure, because all of a sudden people had that time, Paul, at home. You don't have that time, and the pandemic allowed for people to be at home with the family and then try to work around how they were going to get that it was just chucked on us. It was just thrown upon us. All of a sudden, you're in a different situation, and that made people and families stop and take stock of their lives, structure of how they work, how they live, how all of those the lifestyles, the cost and so forth, and those started to move and shift um, sort of towards the outer skirts of London or the outer skirts of any city, and subsequently house prices and demand for housing grew dramatically, and the demand for flats sunk because all the cities were where the business people or the first time buyers who are now probably not traveling into the city, and the tubes were not busy and so forth, and subsequently those prices just held back. But now that everything is kind of finding the new norm, as we say, people are beginning to sort of think, okay, I need to go back into the city, or I'd like to go back into the city. I've spoken to many who say, it's just really nice to go back to work,
Yeah.
because I want to travel in. It's a good buzz. It makes me feel better. There's a different sort of vibe going on, and that then means that they got to either rent a place or they got to buy a place, or they're restructuring there. And of course, investors are now looking to buy the flat market and look to rent again. So I think you'll find that the reversal will take place, Paul, in the stats and that is that whilst the housing market did well in the 2021 sort of criteria, late 2021 basically, and then what's going to happen next is that the cities will start to do better, and the outskirts will probably start to slow down a little bit because that's all settled. People won't be moving from there for a while, but the city will attract first-time buyers, new buyers, not just first-time, but new investor buyers, and of course, our international buyers are back. Literally, I think 11th of March, sorry, 11th of February. Most restrictions are being shifted and lifted, and people are beginning to travel. And we already know, and we get enough calls to know that the desire and the demand for a property in the city place is now getting hot up.
Yeah, it's interesting actually on that point. I noticed this week that staycation bookings, cancellations of those bookings has risen by 18% as people suddenly realise they can go away from February the 11th. But looking at what's on the screen here now, hopefully you can see this because it's really, really interesting and it demonstrates the point exactly. So if you look on the left-hand side, you've got January 2019, and in order, those four little wiggly lines, they are, the top one is London, demand for London flats. The second one is demand for flats outside London. The third one is houses in London. And the bottom one is houses outside London. So you can see that the demand was for flats above houses. And actually, houses outside London were the least in demand in 2019. When you come along to around the middle there, where that huge spike is at January 20, you still see it in the same proportion. But then in May 20, so just as lockdown happened, suddenly the houses shoot way above the flats and remain pretty much well above. And now, if you look just this last year, you can see that houses outside London are in the biggest demand, houses in London second, and then flats outside London, and lastly, flats in London. So it's literally turned it on its head, which is fascinating. And that's obviously seen there the behaviour of people. Now, a 3-bed house is the most demanded property, followed by a 2-bed house, a 2-bed flat, and then a 4-bed house, which is fourth on the list, and then 1-bedroom flats are the last on the list. So that's an interesting turnaround. And moving on to mortgage rates, they're saying that 1.59 above base if you've got a 25% deposit for a 5-year fix, still a very low rate. And even if there will be a couple of 0.25% rises this year, still represents really good value to what we've paid in the past. And that's a good point, because actually these homes are still affordable, which is why there's been so much demand, isn't it, Joe?
Yes, and in fact, the graph is actually pointed out exactly what we've been discussing. And it's interesting, we didn't need this graph, Paul. We've done it already before. I mean, Zoopla should have just called me, and I would have told them what the answer was going to be. But you've got to create jobs for these chaps to do their graphs, and otherwise you'd be missing things, wouldn't you? You'd love your graphs, but the fact is that as a man on the ground, we can see that these are the trends that people are following, and right now the trends towards the flat market is beginning to rise. Also, finally, 4 years later. It is now pretty much on the cards for middle of this year, June 22, July 22, for the long-awaited Crossrail, the Elizabeth line, to actually be in use. In fact, right now they're running under the ground and across there every 3 minutes, empty trains, just to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing as trials. So they're pretty much on the cards to get that going. And whilst that was slightly delayed, it was delayed by 4 years. In a funny sort of way, the 2 years of the pandemic so far actually has played right in its hand, because it's given them a catch-up time. And now flat market, which was originally designed around the Crossrail, Paul. If you think about it, if you jump on the train from Paddington to Reading, there was no flats on that journey. But now, if you look at that journey, all of a sudden, even places like Southall, which probably was the last place on the universe that would consider entertaining flats, because the culture has always been to have a house, is now got skyscrapers of residential blocks along the railway line, and from your days at working with Sunrise and so forth, Merrick Road, all of that side has been developed as residential blocks of flats, which was probably not even in the mind's eye that would ever happen in that situation. And if you went and saw the station there, which was archaic, it was really back in the, I don't know, whatever age, or Stone Age maybe, but it's now all pretty funky and modern and so all of those things have caught up, and that, in my mind, will start to generate the people that are going to travel. So flats are now becoming desirable because their values are good, but also equally their locations are in the right location for things like the Elizabeth line, the Crossrail, that is going to finally come in, and all of a sudden you will start to see a surge in flat sales.
Indeed. Let's move on to a topic that we also discussed not so long ago, because we were talking about the responsibility for landlords to have to upgrade their EPC ratings on their properties to level C by 2025 or 26 or 28, depending on what type of situation they're in. And we did say, didn't we, that there really needs to be some kind of incentive, because there was just no incentive in putting in one of these flash boiler replacement systems, these heat pumps, costs so much money, which doesn't actually reflect in the value of the property when you sell it. So there is a new scheme being suggested to the Chancellor, and I thought I'd share it with you today and we can discuss it now. But it's basically that landlords get a discount on their stamp duty if they make their property more efficient. So this is what a campaign group, an energy campaign group, has urged the government to do. They're the Energy Efficiency Infrastructure Group, obviously a catchy name, made up of industry, business and charities, with the likes of E.ON and the CBI. And they've written to the Chancellor about the issue, and they basically said that they think that he should give a discount on the stamp duty. So basically, stamp duty would be calculated and then nudged up or down around the neutral point based on the energy performance of that dwelling. So the better performing the home from an energy perspective, the lower stamp duty paid. And if you do the work within 2 years of getting the property, you can then resubmit for a new EPC. And if that goes up to the right level or higher, then you get a rebate on whatever stamp duty you paid 2 years previously. On the face of it, Joe, it doesn't sound like a bad idea.
No, I think it's fantastic for the people that sat around the table and came up with it. I think it's very creative. But in practice, I can't see any of the benefits within that scheme, in all honesty. we said, when we had this discussion, that there should be an incentive or some sort of structure for lenders and owners to work together to achieve this zero or C rating in the EPC. But I cannot, in my wildest of dreams, think that a chancellor is going to give you back anything, let alone some proportion of the stamp duty that you may have paid when you bought the property. Now, going forward, not going backward, but going forward, there could be an incentive, perhaps within the stamp duty structure, for the buyers or the first time buyers or the investors, that they could. So if they target it, they could probably hold back paying the stamp duty for a period, or a proportion of it. So let's say hypothetically, you're going to pay £5,000 in stamp duty or £10,000 in stamp duty on a purchase. You could probably hold back 50% of that, give 50% of it to the Treasury, so that they are also getting a float, and hold 50% back. And the only way you would get that exempted is if you can prove that in a given period of 6 months to maybe a year, that you have actually brought the property up to standard C, gave a certification to show that you've done it, and you could have an exemption and you could keep that £5,000, or you would pay a proportion of it as a penalty. Going forward, there's a scheme that I cannot imagine in my wildest dream anyone's going to give you money back. That's just a complete dream in where they are. And I think if you look at the lending part of it, if anyone can actually help existing people, existing borrowers, it's the mortgage companies. And what the government could do is incentivize the mortgage companies a bit and say, look, you need to, grant or have access or give them maybe a mortgage holiday for XYZ period, so that they can actually bring these properties up to scratch. And if they don't, then you're going to have to add that onto their borrowing, and they're still got to pay it. So there is some, mechanism that could be created, and I can see why people want to see that happen in order to speed the process of getting people to get it to rating C, and obviously get the government target. But I can't see, in my mind's eye, how any chancellor would want to give any money back for something that he's already had the money. But I think going forward, there could be structures and schemes created for existing and for new people.
Yes, I mean, if you look at the way that the Chancellor's treated landlords in recent years, he's been on the take, not on the give, that's for sure. But there is, interestingly, this survey does also look into landlords' attitudes to this, and apparently only 1 in 6 say that they plan to improve the energy efficiency of their home in the next 5 years. So only 1 in 6 is going to do anything to meet these deadlines of 2025, 26 or 28. So, and there is real anxiety within this group that the landlords could be driven out of the sector by the changes. That's just not the profit in it for them anymore, because obviously that's why they're doing it, is to make a profit. And therefore, if they've got to spend all the money on the properties, they'd rather move into a different industry. So there is some concern there, but they've certainly got to come up with something, haven't they?
I think landlords, I mean, one in 6 is it just tells you the story, doesn't it? They don't care. They're not interested.
Yeah.
Basically, so what? I'm not bothered. I'm not living there. It is the tenant that's living there. As long as I get my rent, what difference does it make to me? And so, that will be, and that is going to be, the attitude of landlords. Why would they? Why should they? Well, there's just nothing driving them to make that happen. So the only way that you can do that is a collaboration between the lender, the government, and the borrower, to make sure that they all work together to achieve this common goal. If it's just all put on the landlord, or you do this and we'll do that, he's not going to do it. It's not going to happen. He's not interested. Your stats have just told you that 1 in 6 is
Yeah.
going to make an improvement in the next 5 years, Paul, if you're lucky. That 1 in 6, you got 1,000 properties, you got 100 properties that might make an improvement. The rest of them, forget it. It's not going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
You're right in bringing the story up, and I think it is important to work with the government and try and achieve the energy efficiency certificate of C as a very minimum. But I cannot, in my wildest of dreams, in the nicest possible way, think that all these people that have sat around a table and conjured up this cock and bull story about a chancellor wanting to give some money back, they need to drink more coffee and wake up.
Now, there certainly needs to be some kind of major incentive, and I guess it really is on the government's shoulders to do something with that. And
Yeah.
our final story today is another one that we've discussed in the past, not so recently, but we did talk about the number of commercial landlords and what they were all going to do following all the changes since the pandemic. And it's quite interesting, actually, because if you think about it, there is a real change in the way we work. Hybrid working was not something that was even talked about before 2020. Now it's what everybody's talking about, and the labour market, HR professionals are saying, if you're not offering hybrid working now, you're not going to get the best people because that's what people demand. 3 days at work, 2 days at home, or vice versa seems to be what most people want. And of course, from a landlord's perspective, looking to give office space, that causes them a real problem with their traditional contracts that they would have had, the leases that they would have given to firms. And nearly 2/3 of them, as a result, 62% of commercial landlords are struggling to get tenants to fill their traditional office space because the workplace is changing so much. 71% are looking to convert at least some of the space into co-worker spaces. So like the company WeWork, for example. So they're adding in gyms, refreshment facilities, communal working areas, that kind of thing. It's got to be hard for the old commercial landlords at the moment, Joe.
Yes, it is. It's a very challenging time for the commercial landlords, but I have to say that commercial landlords made hay while the sun was shining, and didn't obviously plan for this maybe circumstance to happen. And now that the way people working and the whole infrastructure is changing, they've got to come back to the table and start to think about how they need to be doing this. And some are getting out because they got blocks of flats, blocks of offices, which now can be converted into flats. But even that will come to an end at some stage, because there'll come a point where, flat saturation will happen, and they've got to rethink, or they've got to replan for other ways. And just to give you an example of, you drive down the M1, Paul, and the world of the M1 has changed. In the last, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years, just in my eyes alone. And the reason I say that is that, it was not something I would do readily available, but having to take my daughter up to Loughborough every so often for the university, that journey became part of my stuff. Amazon owns between junctions now. They from one junction to another, they own so much space for the way they deliver and so forth, and as do many others. Ocado, Sainsbury's, big names are taking space on the outskirts, on the basis that the system, the business models have changed. Deliveries have become more involved. People deliver online; it gets delivered to their doorstep, and also equally same way office space, and people going into work who can now work from home remotely. Everything has had a complete change, and we've all got to adapt and adopt new methods and new ways to deal with that. And the problem is that, archaic leases and archaic contracts have now got to be revisited if they want to attract, and this is for commercial landlords, if they want to attract people to say, you know what, I don't want to work from home. I would like to go to the office, but I don't want to be paying through the nose for the office when I actually don't need to go there. I mean, if you think, most of the things that you and I and we do now, as long as you've got a good internet connection, it goes back to that amazing story of mine that you know it's going to matter. Internet connections matter a great deal, and if you've got a good internet connection and you've got your fiber optics and so forth, people are not needing to go into drive or travel into work other than a feel good factor, i.e., that I want to go to work and this is what I need to do. Now, the landlord of the commercial properties, or especially office space, needs to make it attractive for these people to come to work. Otherwise, they'll just say, well, it's not much point. So their companies that own big offices have all shrunk. You know, where possible, they're subletting some of the offices or turning it into business centers where people can come in and go and have a coffee and go to the gym and, you know, even drink at the bar and so forth. I remember going to WeWorks actually just near Marylebone when we were looking for space at one time. I mean, it had everything in there. There was nothing that you needed to leave the building for, you know, from a gym and a pub internally, you know, with draft beer. And so, you know, it was just the whole thing is dramatically changed, and landlords of commercial properties have got to have they've got to appeal to that market now.
It's interesting actually because the commentator writing on this is saying that basically business needs in terms of their office space has been changing for over a decade, but it's been very gentle. And then of course the pandemic kicked it into overdrive basically. And now, since the start of 2020, 3 in 5, so 59% of office landlords have begun offering shorter and more flexible leases. And 52% have added new facilities. 63% have got these gyms and relaxation spaces to help the well-being of people. And it's interesting that currently landlords offer 33% of their office portfolio as some kind of flexible or co-working space, and they forecast that by 26 this will have risen to 44%. So it's something that landlords are taking on, and the suggestion is that the landlords are going to have to start thinking about building their own brands like WeWork, so that when you see the name, you know what it's a bit like Regis, I suppose. When you see the name, you know what it represents, and you can go there and get what you need from that brand, or you can go to that type of brand of office space company, and they're going to have to start building a brand for their own lettings.
Absolutely. And to be honest with you, when you break it down, even those brands can become extremely expensive. And therefore, it's sometimes cheaper to take a small office all by yourself, and then say to yourself, but negotiate a good rent, a good structure. We want to go to work for the atmosphere sometimes, because you know it's important to be able to have collaboration, a little bit of camaraderie with the other people in the building, and you know bounce ideas and all that kind of stuff, which is very difficult to do sitting on your own at home. And sometimes, obviously, Zoom calls and things can do it, but you can't replace you know the reality of life. And so I think as time goes on, commercial landlords have got to take a long-term view as to how they start to reconsider and reconstruct renting that space.
Lastly, but not least today, talking of properties and a property with a view in this particular case. So we've got something on the books of auction property at the moment, which is an interesting little project. It's a piece of land at Oswestry. Tell us about this, Joe.
Yeah, so here we have a piece of land which has got planning to build a house. Small driveway takes you to it. Beautiful outlook from the back. In fact, all round, to be perfectly honest with you. And we're guiding it at £200,000. And if you can see the distance of that picture, you can see the undulating, views across countryside, idyllic in every possible way that what somebody wants to live in that out in the middle of nowhere.
There's the view.
And yeah, amazing views. So yeah, we're offering that at £200,000 as a guide price, and we look to selling that on the 15th in our next auction.
Yes, certainly. So you've got space to develop up there, and then you'll have that fantastic view across the countryside. Whereabouts is that, Joe?
It's bordering on to Wales. In fact, I think it falls just about in Wales, actually, in that postcode. So, of course, housing prices have been doing well in Wales over the last couple of years. So you can add this to your portfolio.
Lovely. Well, Joe, as always, thank you very much indeed. It's been fascinating talking about some of those subjects and being proved right, as we often are on this show, with some of the things that have been happening as a result. So, lovely. Thank you very much indeed for all your wisdom, as always. And thank you for watching Property Matters with us this Sunday morning. We'll be back, of course, same time next week.